Have you ever felt like you are doing everything right in your beliefs, yet something inside still feels restless and unfinished? And have you ever wondered why a lot of religious talk sounds like answers, but your heart still keeps asking the same questions at night? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are stepping into a theme that has surprised people for decades because it does not attack faith. And it does not flatter doubt. It simply shines a bright, calm light on the way we cling to ideas, labels, and identities, and then mistake that clinging for spiritual life. This is the kind of wake-up call that Alan Watts was famous for delivering, and I want to retell it in a way that feels like a story you can actually live with, not just a lecture you hear once and forget. The first idea we are exploring is this. Many people think religion is about holding the correct beliefs, but the deeper function of authentic spirituality is to change your relationship with reality itself, right here, right now. The second idea is this. The moment you confuse the map with the territory, you will start defending the map, arguing over the map, even fighting over the map, while forgetting to walk the ground under your feet. Now let me take you into a scene. Picture a man named Daniel. Again, not a real name, but a real pattern. Daniel grew up in a family where religion was the air you breathed. It was not just a weekly ritual. It was the main story of the house. Certain words were considered sacred. Certain doubts were considered dangerous. Certain questions were considered disrespectful. Daniel learned early how to behave as a good believer. And to be fair, it gave him structure. It gave him community. It gave him a sense of moral direction. It also gave him something else, a silent pressure to never look too closely at the parts of life that did not fit the official story. As Daniel got older, he became successful in the normal world. School, job, relationships, responsibilities. But inside, there was a recurring itch. Not rebellion exactly, more like a quiet curiosity that would not die. He would be in the middle of a prayer, and instead of feeling closer to the divine, he would feel like he was speaking to a wall made of his own words. He would attend a service, listen to the certainty, and something in him would whisper, "If it is so certain, why does it feel so fragile?" One day, he stumbles onto a talk by Alan Watts. Maybe it is a clip shared by a friend. Maybe it appears late at night when Daniel is scrolling his way to avoid his own mind. Alan speaks in that way that sounds playful but cuts deep. He says things that make you laugh. And then you realize the laughter is also a kind of release. Daniel expects an argument against religion. Instead, he hears something stranger, something that feels like a mirror. The mirror shows him that the mind loves symbols, and the mind also loves to mistake symbols for reality. The mind loves the word God, the image of God, the concept of God, the rules around God, the social identity of being a believer, and then it quietly replaces direct experience with those mental substitutes. The person thinks they are worshiping the divine, but often they are worshiping their own idea of the divine, which is actually worshiping the mind. This is hard to hear at first, because most of us do not want to admit how addicted we are to certainty. But Daniel cannot unhear it, because it matches something he has felt. The most anxious believers he knows are often the ones who talk the loudest about faith. The most peaceful believers he knows are often quiet, humble, and strangely open, as if they are not trying to win an argument, only trying to live honestly. Daniel keeps listening. Alan uses a simple comparison that lands. He suggests that religious language is like pointing at the moon. The finger pointing is not the moon. If you stare at the finger, you miss the moon. If you fight with other people about whose finger is the best finger, you still miss the moon. If you build a museum of fingers and worship the fingers, you definitely miss the moon. Daniel feels both embarrassed and relieved. Embarrassed because he realizes how often he has stared at the finger. Relieved because he senses a permission he never had. Permission to look at the moon. That night, Daniel tries an experiment. He sits quietly, not to pray in the usual way, not to ask for anything, not to repeat familiar words. He simply sits. He watches his breath. He listens to the sounds in the room. He notices thoughts rising and falling like waves. He waits for something holy to happen. At first, nothing happens, and then he notices the need for something to happen. That need is loud. It is like a child pulling at your sleeve saying, "Give me a sign, give me a reward, prove it, prove it." Daniel sees that his spirituality has been built around bargaining. If I do the ritual, I should get reassurance. If I believe the right thing, I should feel safe. If I obey, I should be protected from uncertainty. But life never signed that contract. Life does not give guarantees. Life gives experiences. And if you are willing to meet experiences directly, without hiding behind labels, something quiet begins to open. Daniel remembers a phrase he once heard from a Buddhist friend: "Do not cling, do not resist." At the time, it sounded like a neat saying. Now it sounds like a survival skill, because he sees that his mind either clings to comforting ideas or resists uncomfortable questions, and both movements keep him trapped. Clinging and resisting are like two hands squeezing the same rope. One hand says, "I want this." The other says, "I hate that." And the rope is always tension. Alan Watts keeps pointing to this tension. He suggests that a lot of religious conflict is actually identity conflict. People do not only believe ideas, they become the ideas. The idea becomes a badge, and the badge becomes a self. Then defending the idea feels like defending your existence. That is why arguments become heated. That is why people can be kind in daily life and cruel in theology, because the mind is guarding a fragile identity. Daniel starts noticing this in himself. When someone challenges his beliefs, he feels a flare in the chest. That flare is not sacred. It is fear. It is the fear of being wrong, which is really the fear of losing the sense of control that certainty provides. It is also the fear of social rejection, because belonging is powerful. If your community is built around shared belief, doubt can feel like exile. Here is where the wake-up message becomes compassionate rather than cynical. Alan is not saying religion is useless. He is saying that religion becomes dangerous when it is used as a shield against reality rather than a doorway into reality. The same symbol can either open the heart or close the mind. The same tradition can either cultivate compassion or excuse cruelty. The difference is not the label. The difference is awareness. Daniel begins to see that the essence of awakening is not adopting a new belief system. It is seeing through the way the mind builds cages out of its own concepts. The cage can be religious, anti-religious, scientific, spiritual, skeptical, mystical, trendy, traditional. The cage is any concept you cling to so tightly that you stop looking. He remembers something from Chinese wisdom that his grandfather used to say in a totally non-religious way. The water that is too clear has no fish. When Daniel was young, he thought it meant you should accept some messiness in life. Now he hears it deeper. When your mind demands perfect clarity, perfect certainty, perfect definitions, you end up with a sterile inner world. No living compassion swims there. only rigid opinions. So Daniel tries a different approach. Instead of demanding certainty about the biggest questions, he practices sincerity in the smallest moments. He practices honesty about what he actually experiences. He notices, for example, that fear arises when he thinks about death. He used to cover that fear with doctrine. Now he sits with it, not in a dramatic way, but in a simple way. He watches how the fear changes, how it peaks, how it fades, how it returns. He discovers something Buddhist teachings emphasize strongly. Everything that arises changes. Even fear changes. Even the thought of death changes. The body tenses. The mind imagines. Then the breath moves. The moment shifts. The storm becomes weather. As he stays with experience, a new feeling appears, not certainty, but intimacy. He feels closer to life, not because he has solved the mystery, but because he has stopped running from it. The mystery becomes something he can live inside, rather than something he must defeat with answers. One evening, Daniel is talking with a friend named Sarah, who is spiritual but not religious. Sarah says she cannot trust religion because it feels controlling. Daniel says he cannot fully trust his old religion either, not in the old way. Sarah asks, "So what do you believe now?" Daniel pauses. He almost reaches for a new label, a new identity, a new box. Then he catches himself. He smiles and says, "I am learning the difference between believing and seeing." Sarah looks confused. Daniel tries to explain without sounding like a fortune cookie. He says, "When I believed in a certain way, I was always protecting a story about reality. Now I am trying to meet reality directly and let the story be secondary. I still respect traditions. I still appreciate teachings, but I do not want my mind to replace life with a theory of life." Sarah says, "That sounds scary." Daniel nods. It is scary at first, because the mind wants control, but it is also relieving, because you stop carrying the burden of pretending. This is where the wake-up message becomes practical for anxiety. 2. Anxiety thrives on mental time travel. It thrives on stories about what might happen, and on identity statements about what it would mean. If you practice meeting the present moment directly, the mind loses some of its fuel. You do not need to abolish thinking. You need to stop obeying every thought as if it is a command from the universe. Alan Watts often emphasized a playful seriousness. Life is serious, but taking your concepts too seriously is a mistake. When you can see the mind playing its game, you can loosen your grip. Loosening your grip does not make you irresponsible. It makes you sane. Daniel begins to practice what some Buddhist traditions call witnessing awareness. He notices that thoughts come and go, feelings come and go, roles come and go. Even the sense of being Daniel comes and goes. There is an observing presence that is not separate from life, but also not trapped in the content of thoughts. This presence is not a trophy. It is what is already here when you stop clinging. When Daniel experiences this, even briefly, he understands why religious language can be both helpful and misleading. Helpful because it can point toward this presence. Misleading because it can make you chase an image of presence instead of resting as presence. He also understands why people fight about God, because the word God is oft unused as a container for everything people fear losing: meaning, order, morality, comfort, belonging. If you threaten the container, you threaten all those needs at once. No wonder people get defensive. But what if the divine, however you name it, is not a concept that can be defended? What if it is the living reality of awareness, compassion, and interdependence? available in direct experience. If that is the case, then the best way to honor it is not to win arguments, but to become kinder, wiser, and more awake. This is where karma becomes relevant again, not as punishment, not as cause and effect in the heart. If you cling to rigid identity, you create conflict. That conflict shapes your mind. It shapes your relationships. It shapes your destiny in a very practical way. If you cultivate awareness and compassion, you create a different pattern. Over time, your life becomes the echo of your inner habits. Daniel starts noticing that when he is less attached to being right, he listens better. When he listens better, conversations soften. When conversations soften, relationships heal. When relationships heal, his heart feels lighter. That lightness is not supernatural. It is simply what happens when you stop carrying unnecessary armor. At this point, Daniel returns to his old community with a different posture. He does not go to argue. He goes to learn. He listens to the prayers with new ears. He hears how the words can be poetry rather than literal contracts. He hears how the rituals can be reminders rather than requirements. He also sees where fear is hidden inside the tradition, and he does not hate it. He understands it. Human beings fear uncertainty, so they build systems. Systems are not evil, but when systems become more important than compassion, suffering grows. Daniel begins to focus on what all genuine paths emphasize when they are at their best: compassion, humility, ethical living, patience, the courage to face reality, the willingness to serve others. These are not accessories, they are the core. He remembers another piece of Chinese wisdom, something like this: the superior person seeks within, the small person seeks without. Daniel used to seek outward, toward authorities, doctrines, approvals. Now he seeks inward, not in a selfish way, but in an honest way. What is my intention right now? What is my mind clinging to? What am I afraid of? How can I act with kindness even when I do not feel certain? As he practices, he realizes that waking up is not one dramatic moment. It is 1,000 small moments of seeing. Seeing a thought as a thought. Seeing a fear as a fear. Seeing a label as a label. Seeing another person as a person, not a category. Seeing the present moment as the only place life is actually happening. Sometimes Daniel slips. He gets pulled into arguments. He feels the old need to be right. He feels the old shame of doubt. But now he notices it quicker. He returns quicker. He forgives himself quicker. That is progress. One night Daniel is walking outside. The air is cold. The street is quiet. He looks up at the sky and feels something he cannot put into doctrine. It is not a belief. It is not an answer. It is a direct feeling of awe and intimacy with existence. For a moment, the mind stops trying to own the experience. For a moment, he is simply part of it. He thinks, maybe this is what religion was meant to protect, not control. He also thinks about how easy it is to lose this. The next day he could be stressed, distracted, angry. So he makes a quiet vow, not a vow to believe more, but a vow to see more, to remember, to return. Now I want to bring this to you personally, because you might be listening and thinking, what does this have to do with my life right now? It has everything to do with your life, because the same mechanism that creates religious rigidity also creates everyday suffering. The mechanism is confusion between concept and reality. You create a concept of who you must be. Then you suffer when reality does not match the concept. You create a concept of what life should be. Then you suffer when life changes. You create a concept of control. Then you suffer when uncertainty appears. Waking up means you stop demanding that reality obey your concepts. You start meeting reality as it is. And then you respond with wisdom. Wisdom is not cold. Wisdom is clear. Wisdom sees impermanence and stops clinging. Compassion is not weak. Compassion is brave. Compassion meets suffering without hatred. When wisdom and compassion unite, the heart becomes steady. This steadiness is the quiet goal, not perfection, not endless happiness. Steadiness, a mind that can experience fear without turning it into panic. A heart that can experience loss without turning it into bitterness. A life that can be uncertain without becoming cruel. If you grew up with religion, you do not need to throw it away to wake up. You can refine it. You can return to its living essence. You can let rituals be reminders, not chains. You can let language be poetry, not prison. You can let community be support, not surveillance. If you did not grow up with religion, you also do not need to adopt a new identity called spiritual to wake up. You can practice seeing. You can practice presence. You can practice compassion. You can practice ethical action. You can practice letting go. You can practice noticing the observer behind your eyes. The quiet awareness that is already here. And here is a gentle warning. Because it matters. The ego can turn awakening into another identity. The mind can say, I am awakened. I am beyond religion. I am superior. That is just another cage. Real waking up makes you humbler, kinder, and less interested in proving yourself. I want to share a human kind of reflection, the kind you might feel in your own life. Many people are exhausted, not only because life is hard, but because they are carrying an inner performance. The performance of being certain, the performance of being good enough, the performance of having it together, the performance of having the correct views. The performance is heavy. When you wake up even a little, you put down the performance. You breathe. You become honest. You admit you do not know everything. You stop pretending. And in that honesty, you become more trustworthy, not less. People can feel it. They relax around you. They sense that they do not have to perform either. That is how awakening spreads. Not through argument, through presence, through example, through the quiet power of a person who is not owned by fear. Now let us land this with a closing story. A few months later, Daniel meets his younger self in memory. He remembers being a teenager, lying in bed, afraid of eternal punishment, afraid of doubt, afraid of asking the wrong question. He wishes he could go back and sit beside that younger version and say, hey, you are allowed to be curious. You are allowed to be honest. Truth does not fear your questions. Only fragile identity fears questions. He cannot go back in time, but he can live that message now. He can become the adult who does not punish his own mind for being human. He can become the kind of person who uses tradition as a raft, not as a cage. And that is the real wake up. You stop using ideas to hide from life, and you start using wisdom to live life. Before we end, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt trapped between belief and doubt? Like you had to choose a side even though your heart was more complex than that? Have you ever had a moment where a simple experience, a quiet breath, a sudden sense of presence felt more real than any argument you have heard? Share your thoughts and your story in the comments. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If you want more long-form talks like this, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and join the conversation so we can keep building a space where wisdom is practical and compassion is real. Thank you for being here. Until next time, stay awake in the small moments, be gentle with your mind, and let your life be your most honest prayer.